deficit, attention deficit disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. So he had a lot going on. Next slide. So after he was admitted, he started engaging in maladaptive behaviors about 3 days after admission. The first month, we had 12 instances of verbal aggression, 14 instances of physical aggression, mostly against staff and housemates, 15 instances of sexually inappropriate speech, and 3 episodes of threat to self-harm. And per policy, we always have individuals evaluated if they're threatening self-harm with a plan. We usually take them to St. Mary's for evaluation. So he had a lot going on that first month. His behavioral difficulties increased in severity and frequency. And then in July of 2019, a new behavior emerged. So he had a hiatal hernia and could basically vomit on command, and was using that as a way to control staff. He would vomit, and then if the staff attempted to clean it up, he'd physically assault them and then throw vomit on them and collected urine. So you can imagine, we had a lot of staff turnover due to the nature of his behaviors. So property destruction, a lot of property destruction, verbal aggression to people in the community, and the aforementioned issues, multiple evictions. Next slide. So our goal was for him to live in a community setting and to engage in community activities. The barriers that we were dealing with were, public knowledge of criminal history. It was very difficult for us to find housing for this young man, because if you Googled his name, it was the first, or if you even Googled, assaulting, whatever, and first thing that popped up everywhere was this article. If you Googled his name, lots of stuff came up. So like I said, severe property destruction led to multiple evictions. I think he had 4 evictions within the first couple of years. Verbal and physical aggression against staff, other residents, people in the community, definitely made staffing a challenge. He attempted to elope. He would run away from staff. He would jump from moving vehicles. So obviously staff were hesitant to take him into the community because it was very difficult. So medication refusals and the vomiting of medication contributed to his, mood lability. His medications were most definitely not at a therapeutic level because of these things, which made, medication management was super difficult. He didn't want to be in the program was a large issue. He wanted to be back home and with his family. They lived, nearby, so he still had contact with them. But it wasn't approved by the court or by DHHR because of the sex offender status of other people that were living in the home with the family. So it was kind of a generational issue. And sometimes in these cases, they wanted him home. They wanted him to be there. He was their son, brother. But it was just, I think there was just a overarching concern about what would occur if he returned to that type of a setting. Next slide. Basically, he was in a constant state of crisis. He wasn't ever stable enough to establish any kind of routine. By the middle of May of 2020, we were right in the thick of COVID, and staffing became extremely difficult for him. So we made a statewide referral for a placement in a more rural community that he would have less, I guess we want to say, distractions. Like I said, he wanted to get out, go to bars, seek drugs, that kind of thing. And we did have a very difficult time finding people that were even willing to work with him. So statewide referral was made, and we could not find anyone to accept him. And by then, like I said, we were in the middle of a pandemic and no one was accepting new consumers. He was evicted from another apartment on December the 9th in 2020. And subsequently, he moved into a hotel. He was evicted from a series of hotels due to, inappropriate behaviors, mostly verbal issues. He would yell at the apartment. They're the managers of the hotel. He would get into altercations, verbal altercations with other people staying in the hotels, and was asked to leave repeatedly. He pretty much worked his way through every hotel in the town in Huntington. And by 9 of 2021, still in a hotel, he was living at the Coach's Inn. And if anybody knows anything about Huntington, the Coach's Inn is, they're pretty lenient with who they allow to stay there. So when we get to this point, now what? What do we do? He's been evicted from the last hotel in town that would accept him. He did not have a placement at all. Next slide. So I guess this is a good time to discuss some things. Does anyone have any ideas that we did not discuss about keeping this person in the community? Like I said, he did have a lot of, I'm sorry, go ahead, Leslie.
Well, I was just going to interject that, and kind of tongue in cheek that, so Amy has many cases that she could have presented. We obviously chose a complicated one that you all are picking up in the chat, many things going on, and a challenging one, just to hit it off, with real life up front. So, and all to say that in these questions that Amy's asking us, we recognize it's going to be difficult, right? It might be limited, but we want to push ourselves to find some answers and learn from others when we have situations like this. So I see some hands up. Amy.
Yeah, Colleen.
Colleen.
Go ahead and unmute yourself. I see that you mentioned about his trauma history.
Yeah, so I actually know this patient. I was an intern at Sharp Hospital when he was there many, many years ago. So one thing that I wanted to point out about him in particular was he has an extremely awful trauma history that I think is really relevant because it's one more compounding issue on top of others for him. My question for you about keeping him in the community, was he seeing psychiatry and or
Yes.
therapy services?
Yes, he did. In fact, he was a patient at Marshall Psychiatric or Marshall University Psych. And they were very involved with his case. But like I said, there were just so many factors that we couldn't resolve one factor. I mean, obviously, the first thing you try to do is rule out medical. Could this be related to the fact that his medications aren't really serving him because he's not, he's vomiting them up. We discussed having the hernia repaired. but the physicians suggested that we not do that because the hernia was basically the only thing keeping his stomach contents in. He just had a lot of damage in that area. So it wasn't like clinically indicated for him to even get, for us to medically repair the issue that was causing the vomiting.
And given his sexual behavior problems, was he put on a shot or anything that wouldn't
He was he was taking the Depo-Provera shot. We did have most of his issues, sexual issues, were verbal. He would just say inappropriate things. There was a couple of incidents where he was attempting to gain access to a neighbor's pet. This was right before the Depo-Provera began. And I think that's kind of what prompted us to say, hey, I guess I should probably mention the fact that part of the issue, I think, was that when we accepted this person for placement, the history was, there wasn't a lot of available information. We kind of found things out as we went along with this guy. We knew, obviously, what had occurred that made him, that placed him at the hospital. But I mean, there's apparently a very, very long history of CPS involvement, APS involvement. He has, people living in the home. I think a brother and another family member. There's multiple people in the home that have criminal histories, that are registered sex offenders. He was offended. He was the victim of that, but we didn't really even know about that until much later in his care.
So
yeah.
that's one plug. I know this case happened quite a while ago, but if any community provider now has a former forensic patient or a current forensic patient heading their way and they want some more of that information, because I think, for continuity of care sake, it's very important. And just know that we would be more than happy to speak to you. And I'm sure there probably was a lot of information that could have been provided, and I'm sorry that didn't get to you.
Well, and I understand from the point of view of people that have done referrals, a lot of times when you're trying to convince a provider to accept somebody, you don't want to show all the warts for fear of running them off. But we say this to everyone: just tell us. We understand that there may be challenges to serving a person, but it's much easier to deal with them if you have, if you actually have all the information that you need. Things could have been, completed way before he came to us. We could have been better prepared for sure.
Amy, real quick, Jillian had a question, and then we've got a couple things in the chat related to the trauma. So I don't want to move too far from what.
Sure.
But Jillian, I wanted to get.
I probably have an unpopular opinion, to be honest. I don't believe that everybody who has an IDD diagnosis means that they also should be eligible for waiver. Or IDD waiver, that the complexity.
I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying.
Member,
there could be other programs that might be better suited to him.
Well, and it sounds to me like he is a danger to himself and to others on a regular or current basis that wouldn't be appropriate to be out of the institutional setting, until they could properly get his medications under control in that setting, and then slowly integrate him into the community properly. Just coming out of those institutions into the general population is not appropriate for everybody just because they have an IDD diagnosis.
Yeah, I don't believe that the IDD diagnosis was the thing that we focused our attention on when he was in our care. And I should also mention that he was forensic when he was at Sharp, but his jurisdiction ended and they didn't have any reason for him to remain there at that time.
But just because
legal.
somebody's time is served still doesn't mean that it's appropriate to release them into the general population of the world, regardless
Legally, there was much option.
That it has always been my impression that IDD waiver is a volunteer program, not an entitlement program. And I understand that he has a DHHR guardian, but you still have to have a willing participant.
Yeah. Well, that's not the first time we've had somebody on the program that didn't necessarily want to be on the program. That does happen. And we usually can get past that. And a lot of times it's just a matter of maybe not knowing that their opinions and their wants and hopes and dreams and goals are going to be something that the team respects. But in this case, he just simply did not want staff in his home. He didn't want anybody. He felt like it was intrusive. He wanted to go do what he, you know, you got to remember, this is a young fella. He was in his 20s.
It is intrusive.
And he wanted to have the freedom to go out and do things that maybe, you know, he would end up back in jail eventually. But
right.
So what options? Well, we ended up with this fella in the hospital, okay? But he went through all of these placements, and I guess our question would have been, what could we have possibly done differently as far as placements? Now, and I should mention too, a couple of things that we tried. Like Bob mentioned, there was not the option of a crisis placement. We thought that we were going to be able to place him with one of the two crisis units. One wasn't open yet. They had absolutely no staff and nothing on the horizon. And the other initially considered placing him, but their medical director had very serious concerns about placing him in that facility with other IDD folks that were maybe not as high functioning, unable to protect themselves kind of situation. So their medical director, I guess, Googled the name like they do, and that was the end of that. You know, they just couldn't place him. So we didn't have that option.
Afforded the ability, even with staff, like was his staff drivers, was he able to go into the community and come and go with his staff as he pleased? Sure.
He went into the community. That wasn't an issue. Now, of course, let's compound the problem here with COVID. There were certain times that we didn't have our consumers out and about as much. You know,
right.
We had Huntington was terrible hotspot for COVID. So they weren't going to the grocery store every week. He wasn't going. And of course, at this point, he's living in a hotel. So it wasn't, he ate out a lot, which is also not good. But, he could make, sandwiches or have a salad or cereal, but he wasn't participating in a regular day like everyone else that lives in the community has the opportunity to do. So can anybody think of a resource that might be, out there that we didn't think of as far as this person? We did make a referral. We discussed making a referral to an ACT program.
And Jason,
because,
I think Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not scrolling down over here.
No,
Go
you're
ahead.
you're a part. I'll just let you know when they come in. Go for it. Jason, you want to give your resource idea?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Mhm.
Very cool. Did you try the home of your own program if he was one-on-one?
No, I don't think, honestly, that's a good point.
Because then he could just break all of his own stuff and then he doesn't have to go to hotels and apartments, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So when I was 18 and I was in college, I worked for an IDD waiver agency that had a one-on-one person. This person sounds more mental health than they do IDD, like Jillian said. I feel like he was dumped off, maybe, to a willing provider, and then you find out all of this stuff after the fact, and that's exactly what's happening now. But IDD waiver agencies aren't accepting people as dump-offs from the hospitals anymore. So that's the real issue, I feel like, is just it's just easier to give it to somebody who's willing to do it. So that part in and of itself is the reason why we're having this conversation right now.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that you're right. I don't think that they intentionally are trying to be, there's no like subterfuge going on here where they're like, let's find somebody that doesn't know. But a lot of times, like I said, information doesn't get shared with the provider agency because of fear of somebody backing out. And the truth is we really don't care. Whatever, if the hospital's saying that this person's stable, then I think the issue has been for providers that there's no out if it doesn't work out. It used to be that when somebody was discharged from the hospital, you could get this temporary order of protection where if, and like I said, and like Bob said, it's not good to just take somebody out of the hospital and on day one, they suddenly are in the community.
Right, because I worked with a person that was discharged from Colin Anderson. They had severe trauma. They actually were married and had a husband and children. Some of the children were with siblings, but this person was one-on-one. They had their own home. They physically assaulted me as a 19-year-old. Supports with supervision was very lacking. Part of the reason why I'm in this program currently, but like there are situations where people were discharged from institutions with mental health issues, and because of those mental health issues, they have low IQ because of, either task avoidance or potentially the standardized testing for IQs was not catered to someone with mental health. So like this guy specifically is going to have perpetual problems probably for the rest of his life because of mental health. But the stigma of society is that, oh, we'll send them to whoever will take care of them because that's what's easiest and hopefully the cheapest. So like I feel like this is more of the same of what we're seeing now, and the people that are currently in the institutions are probably going to continue to have this problem perpetually until crisis is addressed, the rates of pay is addressed. Like all of these issues aren't something that are new to discuss.
No, it's just kind of it's come to a head, really.
It's coming ahead again. Like this has happened before.
Yeah. This is coming. It's definitely gotten worse. Like Bob said, we have 70 people hospitalized with IDD. There's some definite holes in the continuum of care. We've got, we don't really have a whole lot of options as far as crisis placements go. We don't have a step down unit, which would be amazing for these people that are in the hospital, that has just it's still going to have that ICF level of care that they're getting in the hospital, in the community. The problem that we have, and it's a lot of this is just inherent problems that you have with Medicaid programs. And I don't know if the answer is not a Medicaid program is what they should be participating in temporarily before they get on waiver, like something else. The problem is how are you going to fund something like that?
100%. And like, you're my hero at the moment because you took one of mine out of Bateman. So like, I am 100% on your side. It's just that
Yeah.
it's hard to talk agencies into doing something when they're weighing the liability risk as opposed to what they're going to get reimbursed for care of services.
It's a, you
And
know, that's it.
This is Bob. She's my hero too.
Oh, thanks, buddy.
And liability has been mentioned a lot in the chat, and there's been a lot of discussion in the chat. Real quick, Jason, question for you. Melina had mentioned or asked if home of your own program still exists. You mentioned that. Has it been renamed? Does anyone?
I mean, I haven't looked it up in a long time, but like looking at the person to own their own house, if they have fixed income with like any of the incentives for people to live in West Virginia, like that's case management. That's something that people have to do to like plan and get set up for people. But
Yeah.
like the bigger part is just kind of looking at what we have in our toolbox is like getting pretty low. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where we're at. And like just for the fact that like we had this rate study that came out that said all of the states around us have higher rates of pay, and it not be introduced to the legislature for the budget talks is absolutely something that
You'll
everybody
be happy
needs
to
to be
hear
aware
that it
of.
did come up yesterday, that there was a bill that was introduced yesterday afternoon in House Health, and it got a lot, there was a lot of really good conversation that came out of that. And one of the great things that I thought came out of that, that committee meeting yesterday was that Mike Folio, who's the attorney for disability rights, he laid it out like what the problem was and, you know, what the solution's going to have to be.
Right, because
And
the bigger
hopefully
part
that
though is that this
okay.
isn't new, Amy.
No,
The
it's not.
AARP did a rate study for DHHR in 2022, and that was submitted to legislature with the exact, like not the same results, but the same general. You gotta put more into the programs, and what happened with that last year. So like, it's
Yeah,
not new.
that was unfortunate. I think we were all riding off of the COVID, the ARPA money that we received. But it definitely was, you know, it was like putting a Band-Aid on an amputation.
Right, and I got
You know, it
parents with
helped,
like
but-
severe, like
Yeah.
children with severe disabilities, like weighing if they're going to move out of state or not.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Amy, could you share the bill number that Mike was presenting?
Yeah, the bill is Bill 4408. And that was the initial bill was to discuss the development of a 20 bed, up to 20 bed ICF for folks that have IDD waiver or IDD and very significant disabilities. Was supposed to be like a transitional type home. And a good point was brought up. We have currently 70 open beds right now in the existing ICF system. So, you know, obviously more beds maybe it's a complex problem, and maybe more beds isn't going to be the only solution. Obviously, if you open an ICF with 20 beds, you're going to have a lot of staff. You're going to be competing against a very small pool of people right now.
But if we don't fix and work on workforce issues, which
Yes.
includes salaries and having a viable crisis service system, creating another facility, it doesn't improve anything really. It just adds
No, it
more
doesn't.
beds.
It's just more open beds.
They need to find a way to put funding into what already exists before they release more slots, before they release more beds. Let's service the people that we already have on the system functionally.
Yeah. I mean, you have to understand that not everyone on the program is in this, you know, in this situation. We're not, you know, a lot of the people that are on IDD waiver live at home with family. And that's just fine. I think the issue that we're running into are these, you know, ISS and group home consumers where, maybe they've got, trauma history, youth services involvement. A lot of these people come from out of state. We just admitted somebody back in November that had been in an out of state placement in Utah, and basically applied for IDD waiver. And, we just have an interim setting for him until they can figure out what his long-term placement's going to be. But it's rough.
I mean, we have a lot of members who, you're right, do live at home, but their parents, I have probably 50 consumers whose parents are over the age of 70.
Yeah.
And they cannot get local placement for their loved ones. And what's going to happen when the people who are providing their care pass away? It's a real problem.
Is going to be involved, or another family member, because we get calls every day. I mean, we tell people all the time, you better sign up for services, get them in a day program, get them in some kind of services now. So if and when something, the inevitable occurs, you have the opportunity to, expand their services and add residential care later on. But what we see a lot of times are these people, we've actually had referrals from clients that have had nothing. They've had zero services from a behavioral health provider since they graduated from high school, or if they even went. I mean, we had a female years ago who came to us that had never attended school. She lived at home with her parents. The only place she ever went in the community was church. And the parents died within a couple of months of each other, and a sister who wasn't equipped to deal with the situation kind of inherited her, and she ended up in a residential placement. But it was like, this is a microwave, this is a stove. This was a 60-year-old woman who'd never stepped foot in a kitchen because there was fear that she was going to be, she's going to be injured somehow by, being there. So you would be amazed at the absolute spectrum of cases that we get. And that's part of the problem. It's like there's very little expertise in dealing with clients that are dually diagnosed. And you have to almost, it's like kind of a catch-22. You want to be in an area where there's resources, that there's good psychiatric services, that there's available activities for these folks. But a lot of times these are people that come from very rural settings, and they have a very difficult time adjusting to, I guess I'll call it city life. Huntington's, it's a city, and they're not used to having neighbors. You're not used to seeing police routinely up and down the roads. And it is hard for a lot of people to adjust. Sorry, we just kind of got on the weeds on that. But,
and that's where we need to go. Chad, as things close out, people are putting potential additional resources. I don't know if
that's amazing.
That. So Kelly, Mark, Tucker, would you all want to, I know you've put some things in the chat, but please say more on that end. If you feel comfortable.
Thanks, Jason, for putting that up too.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just wondering about if this individual was ever connected with peer recovery. I know you said they were in Huntington, there's Recovery Point and several other resources there. I know that doesn't directly help with finding them a place, but they are connected in that world a lot. And I have been a peer recovery specialist in the state and worked closely with lots of housing groups and things like that. So just wondering if they were ever connected.
No, and actually it wasn't. I don't think it was definitely one of the primary issues that we were dealing with. I think it was more of like, he was very opportunistic. And at that time, it wasn't legal anywhere around here to get marijuana. And so it's a college town. He figured out which of the neighbors in the areas that he was living, which of those neighbors were users. And like I said, it wasn't like he was, out trying to get a fix anywhere. It was just more opportunistic. I'm going to go become friends with these people and try to get them to give me some of their weed. And P.S. while I'm over here, I like your dog. And then when these people found out what was going on, they of course pitched a fit and he had to be moved. I know that we talk about people that have forensic histories. Housing for them is an extremely difficult undertaking. They don't qualify for a lot of places if they have any kind of a criminal history. And there's a lot of cherry picking that goes on. If you're an agency that's fortunate to have a good relationship with a community landlord that has a lot of properties, which we do, thank God, that's about the only way you can accept these people, is you get a landlord that is super understanding and doesn't care. They don't mind, as long as you fix it. But we were like $78,000 into damages and hotel expenses. So it does become an issue of, at what cost, does serving somebody like this takes away from all the other folks that you're providing care to. Like it absolutely eats up all your time and energy. And it really isn't fair to everybody else and your resources,
So this has been a wonderful discussion, and Amy and Bob, you are absolutely fabulous for getting us started. The time is coming in. If we spend time for lunch to talk to one another, I think it goes by pretty fast with these issues. So just a few closing items. I do want to give a shout out to Kelly. She's put some chats in there. Please take a look before you log off on the side of family supports. Mark's mentioned specialized family care, which is another option. Again, we need more providers on that side, as well as what Kelly mentions, which is training, particularly in things like this case, people like in this case, where if they're nonverbal, if they're aggressive, self-injurious, the more you add on to it, the less training we have to properly approach it. So that's definitely one of the items we need to talk about. So everyone, I think, has brought up a topic that's coming up in the next 5 sessions. So again, the idea is that this is big, and so we're taking a sliver of it and digging deeper in the next few sessions. This is one to get us ready and excited about it. So if you like this, if you are ready to push and gather resources and kind of have a bigger voice to this, join us. I put the dates, and they were also in the registration, excuse me. They'll be out. We're going to get it out more often and to more places as well. Join us. So some of these resources that people have shared, and Heather just shared a positive behavior support. Thank you, Heather. We're going to send this out. We're also going to send some other overviews. And again, just thank you all for voicing whatever perspective you have today, because it's the only way this is going to work. And so with that, we're going to close out. I have thumbs up everyone who said they wanted a certificate of attendance. They're coming in. So if you forgot to do that, please do that. I'll let it roll for a little bit. And thank you for spending your lunch with us. We really appreciate it. Amy and Bob, you're awesome.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.